The gunshot cracked the morning stillness of Wyatt's Crossing Town Square, like thunder splitting an oak. Mason Cole lowered his smoking Colt Navy, the barrel still warm as he watched the would-be bank robber crumple to Wyoming dust. 20 yards away, canvas bags of stolen dollars lay scattered, their contents dancing in the dry summer breeze. The thief's fingers still twitched around his unfired pistol, the life draining from his eyes as blood pooled beneath him. Sheriff Sullivan approached with the caution of a man who'd buried too many friends. His badge caught the harsh sunlight as he positioned himself between Mason and the growing crowd of onlookers. "Third time this month, Cole," Sullivan muttered, nudging the dead man with his boot. "You ain't the law in this town." Mason holstered his weapon with practiced precision, weathered hands moving with the fluid economy that had kept him alive through Gettysburg's bloodiest days. At 40, his face bore the permanent tan and deep lines of a man who'd spent his life facing Western elements and Eastern bullets. "No," he replied, voice like gravel over steel, "but I know how to aim." The crowd's approval came in murmurs and respectful nods. In Wyatt's Crossing, a straight-shooting man who stood his ground counted for something. Mason touched the brim of his hat and turned away, eyes scanning the dusty street with the vigilance of a man who expected trouble around every corner. The summer of 1883 had been merciless to Wyoming territory. 8 months without meaningful rain had transformed once fertile pastures into cracked wastelands. Rivers that had flowed strong since before white men arrived now trickled like final drops from a dying man's canteen. In such times, men with water held power. Men without it nursed desperation. Mason Cole had water. The Triple C Ranch sat on what locals called blessed ground, 2,000 acres of the greenest land in the territory. Even in the harshest droughts, its wells remained strong, its creek flowing silver through pastures where cattle grew fat while others starved. The land had been Mason's salvation after returning broken from the war, where he'd earned a reputation as one of the Union Army's deadliest sharpshooters. He'd built it from nothing but iron determination and the blood money paid to veterans, turning wilderness into a testament to what a man could accomplish with his own two hands. Now Victor Blackwood wanted it. Blackwood Mining and Land Company had been buying up struggling farms across 3 counties, paying pennies for what would soon be worth dollars when the railroad came through. The mining magnate didn't ask twice, and those who refused his first offer often found misfortune following close behind. Barn fires, poisoned wells, cattle mysteriously slaughtered in the night. Mason had refused, twice. Now as he walked away from the dead robber, he noticed a crowd gathering at the opposite end of the town square. Auction day. Usually cattle, horses, equipment from bankrupted homesteads. But today's whispers carried a different tone. "Human auction," a shopkeeper muttered as Mason passed. "They don't call it that, of course. Labor contract is what they say." Mason's jaw tightened as he approached. There on a wooden platform weathered gray by sun and rain stood a woman. No, not just a woman, a giant of one. She towered over the auctioneer, shoulders broad as a doorway, arms corded with muscle earned through work no lady should have endured. Her wrists bore rope marks, raw and red against pale skin. Her chin remained high despite the jeers from the crowd. "Who wants a wife that can snap your neck like a twig?" someone called out. "Bet she eats more than 3 grown men," another added, triggering cruel laughter. The auctioneer, a rat-faced man named Hargrove, circled her like a vulture. "Starting bid at $50 for a working woman strong as an ox. Think of the labor you'll save." No hands raised. The woman, Mason saw her name on the contract board. Emma Townsend, 22, stared straight ahead, her green eyes focused on some distant point beyond the humiliation of the present. Mason might have walked away. It wasn't his business. But then he spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Jackson, one of Blackwood's hired thugs watching the proceedings with unusual interest. Something wasn't right. $40. Come now, gentlemen. Look at those arms. She could carry water buckets all day without breaking a sweat. Still no takers? Emma's hands clenched, her only visible reaction to her public debasement. Mason moved closer, studying the scene. Emma's dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing a fresh bruise. Her eyes, though distant, held not resignation but a carefully banked fire. This was no voluntary contract. $30, final offer for this beast of burden. The crowd's mockery grew louder. A woman nearby muttered, "She'd scare the children half to death." That's when Mason saw it. The Blackwood Mining Company logo stamped on a document in Jackson's hand. The pieces fell into place. Blackwood wasn't just after his land anymore. He was collecting pawns. With deliberate steps, Mason approached the platform. The crowd parted before him, conversations dying like flames doused with water. His reputation in Wyatt's Crossing carried weight. The decorated sharpshooter, the widower who'd buried his wife after the fever took her, the father who sent his only son east for schooling, the rancher who refused to bend to Blackwood's demands. "Cole?" Hargrove acknowledged, nervousness creeping into his voice. "You looking for farm help?" Without answering, Mason climbed the 3 wooden steps to the platform. He stood before Emma, meeting her eyes directly, a courtesy she likely hadn't received in weeks. Up close, he could see intelligence in her gaze, defiance in the set of her jaw. He reached for the rope binding her wrists and cut it with his pocket knife. The crowd fell silent. "She's not for sale," Mason said, his voice carrying across the square without effort. "I'm not looking for a wife." He turned to Emma. "I'm looking for an ally." The collective intake of breath from the onlookers was audible. Jackson stepped forward, hand moving toward his holster, but thought better of it when Mason's gaze shifted his way. The Blackwood man retreated into the crowd. "Now see here, Cole," Hargrove protested. "This is a legal auction." "No," Mason cut him off. "It's not." He turned to the gathered townsfolk. "How many of you noticed the Blackwood mining mark on these contracts? Anyone care to guess why a mining company suddenly needs farm girls?" Murmurs spread through the crowd. Mason took Emma's arm, gently, not possessively, and guided her down the platform steps. "Miss Townsend," he said quietly, "I have a proposition for you, but we should discuss it somewhere else." Emma's first words to him were measured, cautious. "Why should I trust you?" Mason's response was equally direct. "Because I'm giving you a choice, something I suspect you haven't had in a while." 20 minutes later, they sat in Mason's wagon, leaving town behind. The Triple C spread out before them, a verdant island in a sea of drought-stricken brown. A 2-story ranch house stood sentinel at its center, flanked by a barn, stables, and bunkhouses. In the distance, cattle grazed on pasture that had no right to be so lush in this drought. "Blackwood wants my water," Mason explained, nodding toward a creek that cut through the property like a silver ribbon. "Not just the land. There's an underground river beneath Triple C, purest water in 3 counties. Emma sat stiffly beside him, eyes scanning everything with the wariness of someone accustomed to traps. "And what do you want from me?" Mason pulled the wagon to a stop at the ranch house. "Help defending it." He reached behind the seat and withdrew a Winchester rifle, offering it to her. "Can you shoot?" A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by the first hint of a smile. "My father taught me, before they took our farm, before they sold me." Mason nodded. "I'm offering you fair work for fair pay. 1/5 of the profits, plus a plot of land of your own after 1 year. No strings attached." "Why me?" Mason's gaze turned toward the horizon, where dust from approaching riders was just becoming visible. "Because Blackwood's coming for everything I have, and I need someone at my back who has as much reason to hate him as I do." He handed her the Winchester. "So, Miss Townsend, are you my ally?" Emma took the rifle, testing its weight with practiced hands. "Call me Emma," she said. "And yes, Mr. Cole, I believe I am." The saloon at Wyatt's Crossing wasn't much. A weathered two-story building with a badly painted sign and windows permanently clouded with dust. But it served whiskey, and after 3 weeks of working Triple C dawn to dusk, Mason decided they deserved a drink. Emma had proven herself invaluable. Where most hands struggled to move irrigation pipes alone, she carried them effortlessly. When a frightened bull broke through the pen fencing, she caught it by the horns and wrestled it to submission before it could injure itself or others. The ranch hands, initially skeptical of a woman joining their ranks, now tipped their hats when she passed. "2 whiskeys," Mason ordered, placing coins on the bar. Emma stood beside him, drawing stares despite the plain men's clothing she'd taken to wearing. "Don't serve her kind here," the bartender said, not meeting Mason's eyes. "Her kind?" Mason's voice dropped dangerously low. "Blackwood's orders said anyone working for Cole doesn't get served in town anymore." The saloon had gone quiet. In the corner mirror, Mason spotted 3 of Blackwood's men watching with predatory interest. "Blackwood doesn't own this town," Mason said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not yet, anyway." One of Blackwood's men, a tall, scarred brute named Harris, approached. "But he will soon, Cole, just like he'll own that precious water of yours." Emma tensed beside Mason, her hand dropping instinctively to where a gun would be if they hadn't checked their weapons at the door. "Walk away, Harris," Mason warned. The man grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Make me." Without warning, he flung his whiskey into Emma's face. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Mason's fist connected with Harris's jaw with the precise force of a man who calculated his punches like rifle shots. The larger man staggered back, crashing into a table. His 2 companions rushed forward. Emma moved with surprising speed for her size. As one man reached for a concealed derringer, she gripped his wrist, twisted, and there was an audible snap. The man howled. His companion swung a bottle at her head, but she ducked, driving her shoulder into his midsection with enough force to send him flying across the room. In seconds, the 3 men lay groaning on the floor. The saloon patrons stared in stunned silence. Then, slow applause from the doorway. Victor Blackwood stood there, expensively dressed, his silver mustache perfectly trimmed. At 55, he carried himself with the arrogance of a man who believed money could buy anything. Loyalty, justice, even life itself. "Impressive," and he said, stepping into the saloon. "I see why you wanted her, Cole. A strong man needs a strong woman. Isn't that right?" Mason positioned himself between Blackwood and Emma. "She's not mine to want. She's her own person." Blackwood laughed. "How noble." His face hardened. "My final offer, Cole. 15,000 for the Triple C. That's 3 times what it's worth. Not interested? Then perhaps you'd be interested in this." Blackwood removed a folded document from his coat. "Railroad's coming through in 2 months. I've secured the water rights for 10 miles in every direction, except your pitiful creek." His smile turned predatory. "Without access to my water, that railroad diverts around Triple C. You'll be left with nothing but dried-up pastures while progress leaves you behind." Mason didn't flinch. "My water, my land, my choice. For now." Blackwood's gaze shifted to Emma. "Miss Townsend, isn't it? I knew your father. Shame about his accident. Tree falling on a man like that. Terrible way to go." Emma lunged forward, but Mason caught her arm. Blackwood's hand had already moved to his coat pocket, where a derringer undoubtedly waited. "1 week, Cole," Blackwood said, backing toward the door. "Sell to me willingly, or I'll take it anyway. And your Amazon friend there won't be enough to stop me." Thomas Rodriguez arrived at Triple C's gates the following morning. The Mexican-American blacksmith had served with Mason during the war as a scout. He'd saved Mason's life at Antietam, taking a bullet meant for him. "Heard you might need help, amigo," Thomas said, dismounting from a paint horse that had seen better days. His left arm hung stiffly at his side, the permanent reminder of his sacrifice. "Word in town is Blackwood's hiring guns. Not just cowboys with attitudes, professional killers." Mason clasped his old friend's arm. "You shouldn't get involved, Thomas. You've got the smithy to think about." Thomas shook his head. "Blackwood's men broke in last night, destroyed everything." He gestured to his saddlebags. "Brought what tools I could salvage. Figure I still remember how to reload ammunition from our army days." That afternoon, Emma found a map hidden in an old trunk in the storage barn. It detailed something the men had missed: an underground tunnel system beneath parts of Triple C, remnants of an old mining operation that had been abandoned decades ago. The tunnels connected to the water source. "This is how he'll come," Emma said, tracing the faded lines with her finger. "Not over land where we can see them. From below." Mason studied the map, respect for Emma growing. She wasn't just strong, she was observant, strategic. In the 3 weeks since he'd brought her to Triple C, she'd proven herself more valuable than any hired hand he'd ever employed. "We can use this," Mason said. "Set traps in the tunnels." Thomas examined the map's notations. "Better yet," he said with a grim smile, "with the right explosives placed at these junction points, we could flood the entire system." The three of them looked at each other, a plan forming. They had work to do. The first attack came at dawn. Mason had spent days teaching Emma everything about Triple C: the irrigation systems, the defensive positions, the best vantage points. Thomas had converted the barn into an ammunition workshop, casting bullets and preparing charges for the tunnel defense. They were in the south pasture when rifle shots rang out. 2 of Mason's cattle dropped instantly, blood staining their white faces crimson. "Down!" Mason commanded, pulling Emma behind the cover of a large boulder. More shots followed, bullets striking rock and dirt around them. Mason drew his Colt, peering carefully around the edge of their shelter. "3 riders," he muttered. "Northeast corner, by the stand of cottonwoods." Emma checked the Winchester he'd given her, now hers in all but name. "Range." 400 yards, too far for a handgun." She nodded and took a deep breath. "Not too far for this." Before Mason could stop her, Emma rose to one knee, braced the rifle against the boulder, and fired. The report echoed across the pasture. In the distance, one of the riders jerked backward, falling from his saddle. Mason stared at her in astonishment. "That shot!" Emma worked the lever action, chambering another round. "My father was a cavalry marksman before he was a farmer. He taught me more than just hunting rabbits." The remaining riders were retreating, dragging their wounded companion. Mason watched through his field glasses as they disappeared into the tree line. "Blackwood's men," he confirmed. "First warning." That night, as they sat on the porch of the main house, Mason opened up about his past, something he rarely did with anyone: the war, the horror of Gettysburg, his spotter and best friend Samuel dying in his arms, shot by a Confederate sniper Mason had missed. The promise he'd made as Samuel bled out: to build something lasting, something worth the sacrifice. "I came west with nothing but my rifle and Samuel's watch," Mason said, his voice soft in the darkness. "Found this land when nobody wanted it. Dug wells when experts said there was no water to be found. Built every structure with these hands." He flexed his fingers, calloused and scarred from years of labor. "My wife Caroline helped. She was from back east, not built for frontier life, but she never complained. Not once." Emma listened silently, recognizing the weight of shared confidences. "The fever took her 5 years ago," Mason continued. "My son James was 12. I sent him to school in Boston afterward. Caroline would have wanted that, for him to have the education she did. You miss him, Emma observed. Mason nodded, his profile sharp against the starlit sky. Every day. But Triple C is his birthright. Everything I've built is for him. His gaze hardened. That's why I won't sell to Blackwood. Not for any price. In Wyatt's Crossing, Victor Blackwood paced the upper floor of the Grand Hotel, which served as his headquarters. The meeting with Cole had gone poorly. The man's stubborn refusal to sell was becoming more than an inconvenience. It was an insult. Cole made a fool of you, he snapped at Jackson, who nursed a black eye courtesy of Emma Townsend. The woman was supposed to be leverage, not his new defender. She's not natural, Jackson muttered. Strong as a man, maybe stronger. Blackwood waved away the excuse. The Railroad Consortium arrives in 1 month. If I don't secure water rights to Triple C by then, the main line diverts through Cheyenne instead of here. I lose everything. He stared out the window toward the distant hills where the Triple C stood defiant against his ambitions. No more warnings. No more games. He turned to his foreman, a former Union Army major named Richards. Assemble 20 men, the best. We finish this in 3 days. Richards, a man who had ordered men to their deaths in the war without blinking, nodded. And Cole? Blackwood's face hardened. Make it look like an accident, a tragic ranch fire, something suitable for the newspapers. Neither man noticed the young boy slipping away from the door where he'd been listening. The son of the hotel maid, already running toward Triple C with a warning. Mason, Emma, and Thomas transformed the ranch into a fortress. Strategic firing positions were established. Escape routes planned. The livestock moved to the most distant pasture. Ammunition stockpiled. The underground tunnels rigged with explosives connected to floodgates that would channel the precious underground river into the passages when detonated. Like the defenders of the Alamo, Thomas mused as they finished preparations. But hopefully with a better ending. The boy from town arrived exhausted, delivering his warning between gasping breaths. Mason gave him food, water, and $5 for his service. More money than the child had ever held. You've been practicing with that Winchester for weeks, Mason told Emma that evening. But tomorrow won't be target shooting. He cleaned his Sharps rifle, the same one he'd carried at Gettysburg, with methodical precision. Taking a human life changes you, makes you something different. Emma sat across from him, her own rifle disassembled for cleaning. I've been changed already, Mr. Cole. When my family sold me like cattle, when men bid on me like I was a prize mare, her hands moved with surprising delicacy over the weapon parts. I know what I'm fighting for. My freedom, my future. Mason nodded. Thomas will man the south approach. I'll take the north ridge. Best vantage point. You'll trigger the tunnel floodgates when they're in position. He paused. If something happens to me, nothing will happen to you, Emma interrupted. We're allies, remember? For the first time since she'd known him, Mason Cole smiled, a brief softening of his weathered features. Yes, ma'am, I remember. Dawn broke blood red over Triple C. Mason watched from his position on the ridge as dust clouds rose from the southern approach. Blackwood's men, no longer bothering with stealth. Through his scope, he counted 15 riders, armed with rifles and what appeared to be dynamite strapped to their saddles. What Blackwood couldn't know was that Mason had spent the war perfecting the art of killing from distance. The Sharps rifle in his hands could deliver death at 800 yards in the right conditions. Today, with still air and clear skies, conditions were perfect. The first shot dropped the lead rider without warning. The second followed before the echo of the first had faded. 2 men down in under 10 seconds. The remaining riders scattered, seeking cover that didn't exist in the open range. Mason continued his methodical work, each shot finding its mark with terrifying precision. 5 down, then 7. From his secondary position, Thomas engaged riders attempting to circle around to the west. His old cavalry carbine lacked Mason's range, but made up for it with rapid fire. Meanwhile, Emma watched through field glasses from her position near the main tunnel entrance, hidden among boulders. According to plan, a second group would attempt to infiltrate through the tunnels while the mounted attack served as distraction. She didn't have to wait long. 5 men appeared at the concealed entrance, carrying torches and dynamite. They disappeared into the earth, unaware they were being observed. Emma counted to 300, giving them time to reach the junction point marked on their stolen map. Then she pulled the lever that would seal their fate. The explosion was more violent than they'd anticipated. The ground shook beneath her feet as thousands of gallons of pressurized water surged through the tunnel system. The men inside never stood a chance. But the vibrations triggered an unexpected collapse near the main house. As a section of ground gave way, Emma watched in horror as Mason's position on the ridge destabilized. He scrambled for safer ground, but too late. Earth and stone slid away beneath him, sending him tumbling down the hillside toward the attackers below. Without hesitation, Emma abandoned her post, racing toward where Mason had fallen. She found him half buried in debris, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle, his rifle lost in the rock slide. 3 of Blackwood's men approached cautiously, sensing advantage. "Behind me," Emma commanded, positioning herself between Mason and the approaching threat. She raised the Winchester. "Stand aside, woman," one called out. "Our quarrel's not with you." Emma's reply was a bullet that took him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The other 2 opened fire. She felt the burn as a bullet grazed her arm but didn't flinch. Her second shot missed. Her third didn't. The last man standing threw down his weapon. "Don't shoot! I surrender!" From the ground, Mason pulled his Colt with his left hand. "Emma," he warned, "Blackwood doesn't hire men who surrender." As if confirming his words, the man reached for a hidden derringer. Emma's Winchester cracked one final time. The man fell face first into Wyoming dirt. A slow clapping sound came from behind them. Victor Blackwood emerged from behind a rock formation, flanked by 2 gunmen holding Thomas at gunpoint. Blood trickled from a wound on the blacksmith's temple. "Impressive show," Blackwood said, advancing toward them. "I underestimated you, Miss Townsend. And you, Cole, still the deadliest shot in the territory, even after all these years." He gestured to the devastation around them. "But it seems you've destroyed your own property in the process." Mason struggled to sit up, grimacing through the pain. "Better destroyed than in your hands, Blackwood." Such sentimentality. Blackwood removed a document from his jacket. "This is the deed to Triple C. Sign it, or I put a bullet in your Mexican friend's head." "Don't do it, Mason," Thomas growled, earning a rifle butt to his stomach. Emma glanced at Mason, a silent question in her eyes. He gave a barely perceptible nod. "Let him go first," Mason demanded. "Then I'll sign." Blackwood laughed. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate, but very well." He gestured to his men, who shoved Thomas forward. The blacksmith stumbled, but remained standing. The pen, Cole. Blackwood extended the document and a fountain pen. Mason took them with his good hand. As he positioned the paper against his knee, he gave Emma a second signal. 3 quick taps of his finger against his leg. "You know," Mason said conversationally as he prepared to sign, "my father taught me something valuable before he died. Said a man should always have a backup plan." Blackwood frowned. "What are you—" The roar of hoofbeats interrupted him as 24 riders crested the ridge. Townsfolk from Wyatt's Crossing, led by Sheriff Sullivan, all armed and moving fast. In the moment of confusion, Thomas dropped to the ground. Emma lunged for Blackwood, her powerful arms locking around him before his men could react. Mason's Colt barked twice, dropping both gunmen where they stood. "Let me go, you Amazon bitch!" Blackwood struggled against Emma's grip, but might as well have been fighting an iron vise. "That's not a very respectful way to address my business partner," Mason said, pushing himself up despite his broken leg. Sheriff Sullivan and the townspeople surrounded them, weapons trained on the few remaining Blackwood men, who wisely dropped their guns. "Whole town heard about your plans, Blackwood," Sullivan said. "The boy who overheard you, he told more than just Cole." "This is absurd," Blackwood sputtered. "I'm a businessman. These people attacked me." "Found these in your hotel room," Sullivan continued, producing a stack of documents. "Forged deeds, bribery receipts, orders for property clearance that sound an awful lot like murder." Blackwood's face drained of color. "You had no right. When you threaten one of us, you threaten all of us," a storekeeper called out. "This ain't your territory to take." Mason locked eyes with Blackwood. "A man isn't measured by what he owns, Blackwood. He's measured by what he's willing to protect." He nodded to Emma, who released the mining magnate with a shove. "Take him away, Sullivan," Mason said, "and make sure he stands trial for every farmer he's ruined, every life he's destroyed." As Blackwood was led away in handcuffs, the victory seemed hollow against the devastation surrounding Triple C. The underground river had been diverted, flooding large sections of pasture. The main house stood, but several outbuildings had been damaged beyond repair. "We won," Thomas said, helping Mason toward the house. "But at what cost?" Mason looked at the muddy, cratered landscape that had once been the pride of Wyoming territory. "We can rebuild." Emma took his other side, bearing most of his weight effortlessly. "We will rebuild," she corrected. 3 months later, James Cole's stagecoach arrived from Boston. The 19-year-old stepped down to find a transformed Triple C. The devastation had been cleared away. New barns stood where old ones had fallen. The underground river had been redirected into a series of irrigation canals that now served not just Triple C, but neighboring ranches as well, for a fair price. His father, legs still in a brace but healing well, sat on the rebuilt porch with Emma and Thomas, reviewing plans for a water distribution system that would help the entire county survive future droughts. "Son," Mason said, rising with the help of a cane to embrace the young man, "meet the people who saved your inheritance." James shook Thomas's hand warmly, then turned to Emma with undisguised curiosity. "Father's letters mentioned you, said you were the strongest person he'd ever met." His eyes reflected his father's directness. "Thank you for protecting him." Emma nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "He gave me a choice when no one else would. Treated me like a person, not property." She glanced at Mason. "We're allies." "More than allies," Mason corrected, surprising them all. "Partners." He handed James an official-looking document. "I've redrawn the Triple C articles of ownership." Thomas started to protest, but Mason raised his hand. "My mind's made up. Triple C doesn't stand just for Cole anymore." He looked at each of them in turn. "From now on, it's Cole, Colt, and Townsend. The Triple CT Ranch." Emma's eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Cole, Mason," he corrected. "Partners use first names, Emma." She blinked rapidly, fighting unexpected emotion. "I was just your hired help." Mason shook his head. "No, you were never just hired help. You were exactly what I needed. Not a wife, not a servant, but an ally, an equal." James looked from his father to Emma, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Mother would have approved," he said quietly. "She always said you needed someone who could match your stubbornness." Later that evening, Mason found Emma by the creek, watching the sunset paint the water gold. "My father used to say that strength was a gift," she told him without turning around. "Most never understood that. They saw only what I could lift, not who I could become." Mason stood beside her, his cane sinking slightly into the soft earth. "Your father was right." He gazed at the land stretching before them, land they had defended together. "A man is not measured by what he owns, but by what he's willing to protect." He offered her his hand, not as a romantic gesture, but as an equal, a partner, an ally. And a woman, he added with newfound wisdom, is measured the same way. Emma took his hand, her grip firm and sure. Together they watched darkness settle over Triple CT, secure in the knowledge that they would face whatever came next side by side. Not as master and servant, not as husband and wife, but as allies who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Strength recognized strength. And in the harsh Wyoming territory of 1883, that was the strongest bond of all.